Hey everyone, George here, and welcome back to the channel, The Art of Water. Today we're going to be talking about what I think is one of my favorite tetras, and it really is a fish that gets a bad rap. And I'm talking about the Serpae Tetra, otherwise known as the Jewel Tetra or the Callistus Tetra. Now, the particular variety that I'm going to be talking about today is not much different than the original Serpae Tetra, but we're talking about the long fin Serpae Tetra, which I think is just a little bit more beautiful than its cousin, the standard Serpae Tetra. Now, these fish have had a bad rap over the years about being aggressive and fin nippers and things like that. But a lot of that comes down to how we, as fish keepers, understand this fish and how we sort of put them with other fish and whether or not we're doing the right thing. So we're going to be talking about this fish. We're going to be talking about how we can keep these fish and really enjoy them, because they're really a beautiful fish when you really look at them closely. And like I said, this long fin variety is even that much more beautiful to look at. So we're going to be talking about the Serpae Tetra, otherwise known as the long fin Serpae Tetra, and we're going to be doing that in just a few minutes here. The Serpae Tetra, otherwise known as the Jewel Tetra or Callistus Tetra, kind of a fish that gets a little bit of a bad rap, and we're going to talk about that today and what we can do to keep these fish and really enjoy them without having the problems that some people seem to have with these fish. Now, number one, I want to talk about the species itself. This particular tank that you're looking at right here is a temporary tank for these fish. I recommend that you keep them in nothing less than a 10-gallon tank, and you keep them with a school of about 5 at a minimum, and as many in a 10-gallon is up to 7, and on up as you get larger tanks. Now, the species is, of course, a freshwater fish. It is commonly found in places like Brazil, Peru, Paraguay, and other parts of Central and South America, even as far south as northern Argentina. So this is a fish that really has quite a broad range and is found quite far south in South America or Central America. Now, the tropical fresh waters around the Amazon rivers often have lakes and ponds and tributaries that sort of run off the sides of these beautiful areas of the Amazon River, and this is where you will find these fish most of the time. Their color range is predominantly sort of a blood color, but as you can see, even over on this side over here, we have one here that is almost a clear color and almost has no red at all, and that would be a female. Now, when you're looking at these fish to sex them, you're going to be looking at the males as being a little bit smaller and streamlined, and the females are going to be a little bit more stouter, a little bit more washed out in their color, but they are definitely going to be larger than the males always. So they're a slow-moving fish. They're not really schoolers in the traditional sense. In fact, they really kind of have a herky-jerky way about them that is really not shoaling either. It's kind of hard to explain this fish, but they definitely are a fish that will travel together, but it's a very loose school. It's not a tight school at all. And so if you're looking for a tight schooling fish, this is not the fish that you're probably looking for in your community tank. You're probably looking for something more like a cardinal tetra, a rummy nose tetra, or even maybe a raspora of some kind, such as the harlequin or pork chop raspora would be better suited for your tank if that's what you're looking for. Now, these guys, as I said, get a bad reputation. And one of the reasons why they get a bad reputation is because they have a reputation of being fin nippers and being aggressive in that sense. Now, the reason why that would be the case is you're putting them with the wrong kinds of fish. I do not recommend these guys be put into a community tank where you have such fish as angels or gouramis or even discus or fish like that that have large finnage or more decorative finnage, because these guys, when they become aggressive, the first thing they're going to do is nip at the tails and fins of these other fish that are in your community tank. So I really don't recommend that. Now, when we talk about the needs of this fish, these guys are really a beginner's fish in many ways if you have had just a little bit of experience, all the way up to, you know, somebody who's been doing this hobby for maybe a year or two. But they're a great asset to any tank if you know what tank you're going to be putting them with and the kind of environment that is going to make not only these fish happy, but the fish that they're with happy as well. Temperatures for these fish range anywhere from 22 to 27 degrees Celsius. They also would be a fish that, for those of us who don't deal with Celsius, we're talking about 72 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Water temperature is really kind of all over the board with these guys. It's not that important. I definitely would not go below 72 to 75 degrees. At a minimum, I would suggest keeping these fish at 75 degrees Fahrenheit and right around 22 to 24 degrees Celsius to keep them happy and healthy. Serpae tetras are not a large fish in the traditional sense. They are not a nano tank fish, however. As I said, I think the minimum size tank that I would keep these guys in is a 10-gallon. They're going to do way better with a 15 to 20-gallon community tank, where you start out with, if you have a 10-gallon, maybe a school of 5. And if you have a 15 to 20-gallon tank, you can put them in schools of perhaps 7 to 10 fish. But I wouldn't do anything more than that unless you have a much larger tank, because this is going to trigger that aggression that we've been talking about and this territorial sort of environment that we see them. Now, I don't think that this is so much a territorial thing as it is a sex thing, and you've got to really think about this when you're putting these fish in your tank as to how many males to female ratio that you might have. I really recommend being careful with that and making sure that you do not keep so many males and less females that they become aggressive in the sense that they are outnumbering each other and becoming very territorial, I should say, over their female counterparts. So they get to be roughly 2 to 2.5 inches. I have seen these fish right around 1.5 to 2 inches most commonly, But in tanks that are larger, I've seen these fish really thrive in tanks all the way up to 50 to 100 gallon and get to be right around 2.5 inches. I think would be probably the maximum size that you would see these guys in. I would say they generally do better and show off their best colors in soft or neutral water to slightly acidic water. As with any other schooling fish, they thrive in really large groups, as I just said. The more tank size you have, the more of these you can keep. But as I said, you really want to make sure that you keep them in a minimum of 5 in a 10-gallon tank and sort of work your way up based on that. Some people say you don't want to have anything less than 6 fish. I have kept them in 5 to 7 in a 10-gallon, and they've done really, really well. And I would just make sure that you've got plenty of hiding spots. You've got plenty of areas for these fish to get away if they need to, providing that you keep them in a tank that does give them some kind of shelter, I can't talk today, but also gives them the ability to have some space to swim. Now, they're not huge swimmers in the sense that they need a huge amount of space, but I do recommend that you are really, really careful not to keep them in too small of a tank, because they will show that aggression that we talked about, and that will show up rather quickly as they establish territory or males seek out females for breeding purposes and that sort of thing. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about this fish as opposed to other tetras, and we're going to talk about the differences between the standard Serpae and the long-fin Serpae, and we're going to get right back to that in just a few minutes here. Now, the Serpae Tetra does have a reputation of having kind of a jumpy, kind of squirmy kind of way of swimming, and sometimes that can alarm aquarists who are not familiar with the way these fish move, and I can assure you there's nothing wrong with them. This is a very common way for these fish to move about the tank. As I said, they're not really long distance swimmers. They are more of short burst type of fish. Unless they're alarmed, like any other fish, they're going to be, moving pretty quick on you if for some reason they feel like they're endangered in some way. But the fish itself, if kept in schools that are properly balanced and that sort of thing, they're going to do really, really well with establishing a pecking order, just like most fish do. But when establishing a pecking order, they're going to really depend on you to establish the size of the school that is proper for the size of the tank, or a school of these guys that are going to work well with your community tank. As we talked about earlier, if you have more decorative fish as gouramis or angelfish or discus, fish like that have long hanging fins and appendages, they're going to probably nip at those fins and cause some problems with that kind of fish. So you want to be really careful not to put them in with fish like that, especially if the tank is not very big. If you are going to put them in with more decorative or long-finned type fish, you want to make sure that you've got a rather large tank and that these guys don't feel threatened territorially, and that is going to become really, really important as you start figuring out how the placement of these fish work with your particular community tank. Now, as I said, there are two varieties of this fish. We have the standard Serpae Tetra, and then we have the longfin. Now, this is the longfin, and I'm not going to move really fast because these fish don't like that. They don't like, I think as they get to know you and know that you're the one that's feeding them and that sort of thing, they will do better. But really quick and sudden moves around the tank are going to send them on a scurry around the tank pretty fast, and they're going to go and hide. But if they get to know you as the person that feeds them every day, they will readily come to the front of the tank. Now, one of the things that I'm noticing about this small school of 7 that I have in this holding tank, and that's all this is a holding tank. This is not a tank, so I don't want people sending me comments about, oh, that tank's too small for that many fish and that sort of thing. That's not what the intention is here. These fish are new to me. They were given to me by a friend the other day who raised them, tank raised them, and I've had them before, and I really like the fish. But before you send me any messages about this being too small of a tank and whatever, I already know that, and this tank is really just a holding tank or a quarantine tank for these fish to be in for 7 to 10 days. They've been in here basically about 3 days now, and they're doing just fine. Now, you're going to notice one of these fish, this guy right in here, is almost white, almost has no what we would call that traditional blood red color, and it's a female, but I have no idea why that color is missing from this particular fish. Now, this may be just a trait that showed up in this particular fish and is not an issue at all, but it is a kind of a strange look. You wouldn't even think of it as a Serpae Tetra if you didn't know what to look for in the other markings. So what we have in this tank is 3 males and 4 females in here. Excuse me, 2 males and 5 females in this tank. So that is a good balance of male to female ratio, and you're going to do really, really well with those. Now, we're going to talk about breeding here in a few minutes, and what I think if you're going to raise these fish or pair them up and try to get them to breed, there's some things that you might want to know about them before you do that, and we're going to get to that in just a minute here. Now, the scientific name for the Serpae Tetra is the Hyphessobrycon family, which is a rather large group of tetras that, like I said, are found Brazil, Peru, Paraguay, Bolivia, and even as far north as some parts of Argentina. And like I said, they're found mostly in still backwater ponds and tributaries, small lakes and streams that come off the Amazon. And they like not a really heavily vegetated tank, but they like a tank where they do get to have some places where they can hide and sort of stake out a small piece of territory for themselves. Now, as far as breeding goes, these guys are definitely prolific breeders if they are given the right environment to do that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit here. So if you are looking to breed these fish, that you have an opportunity to really look at this fish as to whether or not it is best suited for you to do that. I like this fish a lot. As I said, their reputation precedes them a little bit as being fin nippers and a little bit aggressive, but I find that when these fish do settle in and they get their pecking order established a little bit, that they can be really a really nice fish to deal with. As I am watching these fish right now doing this video, I can see that there is a little bit of aggression going on between them, but that's simply because they've only been in the tank here a couple of days, and as I said, this is a temporary home for them, so you're going to have a little bit of that going on. So I don't want you to think that that is the most common behavior for them, because it's truly not. Now, as far as breeding goes, like with most tetras, it can be difficult, even though they are prolific breeders, due to the few obvious differences between the genders. And that's what you have to be careful about, is knowing when you have males and knowing when you have females. Now, I'm going to show you the difference between the male and the female in this particular tank so you understand. Males are smaller, females are larger. If you look at the very bottom of the tank right here, you're going to see that we have 2 males with this group of 5 females. And we do have our oddball over here that is kind of a washed out white. I've never seen that before, but I kind of like it. It's very interesting. But the males are definitely a slimmer and smaller fish than the females. They're more streamlined. Also, they have visible differences in the shape of their swim bladder that can be seen above and behind the silverish abdominal cavity when you're looking at them from the side. To breed these fish, they should be given a small, dedicated breeding tank. I would not try to breed these fish with a large school or even a moderate-sized school of fish. What you want to do is find a breeding pair and put them in a dedicated tank that is well planted with thick bunches of fine plants such as Myriopallium and other types of plants such as that. A place where they can really just lay their eggs and have a lot of water that sort of filters through this sort of meshy type plant. And filtering through peat moss can also be something that you can do. You can make a breeding ball out of different types of things that you might find. And once the eggs are laid and the female has pretty much done that, the eggs will hatch in about a day. Now, I would take these fish away from their parents within 2 or 3 days of hatching, because if you don't, then they are likely to eat their young, and that is not uncommon with these fish or any other tetra. They seem to do that if they are left with the young fry, and that's just something that you need to know, and that's something that most of us would commonly know when we're trying to breed fish that are egg layers. And when they hatch out, within a day or two, they will become preyed upon by their parents if left unattended or not separated from the plant or from the planted area where the eggs were laid and put into their own separate tank. The average lifespan of a Serpae Tetra is about 7 years, so it's quite long for a fish of this nature, and it's hard to know how old a Serpae Tetra is when you get them, but you can tell pretty much by the size of them. These fish are running right around 1.5 inches, maybe a few of them in this little group here getting close to 2 inches, but 1.5 to 1.25 inches, which tells me that these fish are right around a year old. So you want to keep that in mind when you're getting these fish, that they will live to be approximately 7 years of age if they're kept in the best, in the right conditions. So some of the things that you might want to know about these fish, so that we don't get too far into the species profile to the point where I'm boring you to death, is that these fish are part of the tetra family, but they're a unique and beautiful part of the tetra family that is a little bit more interesting. In other words, they have personality, and they do have that sort of way about them that just makes them really, really unique in many, many ways. Now, as far as feeding these fish, they will accept pretty much anything that you give them, as far as flakes, bug bites. There are some bug bites out there that are a great size for these fish to eat. I would feed them twice a day, smaller portions, just to kind of break it up, and keeping in mind the other fish that you may have in the tank with them, whether or not you are raising them as a community fish or if you're raising them in a species tank. But you want to be careful, just like you would with any other fish, not to overfeed them and pollute the water. That is really easy to do. These fish will not be a fish that you get home and won't eat for 2 or 3 days, such as sometimes you'll find with a cardinal tetra or a lemon tetra or an ember tetra or something like that. These guys, I would say, if they've been in your tank for 3 or 4 hours and you offer them some food, these fish are likely going to eat that. They're very, very aggressive eaters, very prolific eaters, so you shouldn't have any problem with that at all. If for some reason you are seeing that these fish are not eating within a 24-hour period, then you probably have some water quality issues or something like that that is preventing them from eating. So I would certainly check my water parameters or anything like that before you get overly concerned. And you may find that just a simple water change will bring these fish around, and they will start eating much more readily at that point. So that's about it, guys, with the Serpae Tetra. I'm going to give you some last little hints about this fish before we go, and we're going to do that in just a minute here. So in summary, I think, as I said, the Serpae Tetra is really quite a misunderstood fish as far as their aggressiveness and their tail nipping and stuff like that. I think that if you put them in the right environment, that these fish will do well in pretty much any kind of a community tank. As I suggested, try to keep them away from fish that have large tails and fancy tails, such as maybe angels or discus or grammies or any number of different fish that have those characteristics. So these particular ones, the long-finned Serpae Tetra, I think is particularly pretty. And I don't really know what's going on with this white one in here. I've never seen that before. That must just be some weird thing that's going on here. He's a completely, or she is a completely healthy fish, and I see nothing here that would suggest that there's anything going on other than the fact that I just thought the fish would color up at some point. He was a little paler, or she was a little paler than the rest of them when I got him, but I really didn't think anything of it, so I think it's fine. But long story short, I really believe that these are going to be great community fish, either in a species tank, a 10-gallon. If I do a species tank, I might build the school up a little bit, probably to maybe 10 to 12 fish if I do that, and just make it a species tank, or put them in a 20-gallon community tank and build the school up again a little bit higher, and just kind of go from there. But like I said, a great little fish. As you get to know these guys and you get to understand their habits and put them in the right environment, they're going to be great little fish for you. You're going to enjoy them. They're beautiful fish. Got a lot of nice color, a lot of nice personality, and I think you're really going to enjoy them. Anyways, thanks for joining me today, and I hope you hit the like button. I hope you'll hit that subscribe, and also leave a comment there. All your comments are welcome. I love to have them. I like to interact with people. Let me know what you thought of the species profile today, whether you liked it, or if you have any questions that I didn't answer that you want answered, or if you want to add something to it that I might have missed, and or you disagree with something that I said. I'm always happy to talk with you and debate those sorts of things. So anyways, hit the bell up here, and you'll always know when we have new content coming out, and we're going to have a bunch of stuff coming up here over the next couple of weeks. Got a couple of aquariums coming through my sponsors that I'm going to be doing some builds on and doing some unboxing and reviews on. A couple of canister filters that are not quite here yet, that I will also be doing some unboxing and reviewing those as well. So anyways, George here with The Art of Water. Like I said, look forward to talking to you again soon. We'll do this occasionally when I have a new species that I really find that I enjoy. We'll talk about it. So anyways, thank you for hanging out with me today. We'll talk again soon.